Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you've never seen my face before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week, so if you think that's something that you might want to stick around for, then definitely subscribe. Before I say anything else, I just want to let you know that it is very windy today and there is very heavy rain, so I do apologise if you can hear that in the background. Hopefully you can't. I've got my window shut, but if you can, I'm sorry. Anyway, this week we are going to be talking about the case of Beth Jane Doe, also known as the Carbon County Jane Doe, so I may refer to her as both names in this video. And I believe this case was suggested to me by one of you guys in the comments of my last Jane Doe video, the Vernon County Jane Doe, and I was shocked that I had never heard of this case before because it is one of the most horrific Doe cases I've ever researched, which I guess is a bit of a warning. This one is particularly gruesome and upsetting. So this case takes place in the year 1976 in the state of Pennsylvania in the US. It was the 20th of December when a 14-year-old boy named Kenneth Jumper was walking along the bank of the Lehigh River, which is under the Interstate 80 bridge in Whitehaven in Pennsylvania. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon and Kenneth was just walking along this river when he came across a suitcase on the ground, and he probably didn't think much of it at the time, so he continued walking towards this suitcase. But when he did, he noticed that there were what appeared to be human remains inside of this suitcase. Of course, Kenneth was shocked and panicked by this discovery, and he went straight home and he told his brother what he had found, and his brother contacted the police. So the police went to the scene and they recovered this suitcase, and after looking around the area they found two more suitcases. The suitcase that Kenneth found was along the riverbank and the other two were approximately 20 feet away in a nearby wooded area, and all three of them contained human remains. It was determined that these suitcases had been literally thrown off the Interstate 80 bridge. The person who threw them off was probably hoping that they would land in the Lehigh River and sink, and police believed that they had been thrown from a moving vehicle. So the suitcases had been thrown out of like a car window or something as someone was driving. Now the drop from the bridge was about 300 feet, and so when they landed, the force from hitting the ground was enough to break them open, which is why Kenneth was able to see what was inside one of them. These suitcases contained the dismembered body of a young woman. In two of them, there were her arms, legs, and torso. However, her breasts had been cut off. And in the third suitcase, which I believe was the one Kenneth had found, in this suitcase was the dismembered head of the woman, although her ears and nose had been removed. But it wasn't just her body in this third suitcase. Also in there with this woman's head was the dead body of an unborn full-term fetus. This woman, whoever she was actually 9 months pregnant at the time of her death. She was going to be giving birth very soon, and she was expecting a baby girl who, if she had been born, would have been a healthy baby. So the woman's remains were taken for a post-mortem, and it concluded that she had been strangled to death. However, she had also been shot in the neck. One source online said that authorities were unsure whether she had been shot before or after death, but I think it was probably after death, after she was strangled, because you would think that a gunshot wound through her neck would have killed her instantly, and that would have been her cause of death. Maybe the killer strangled her to death, and then just to make sure she was dead, he shot her in the neck. The coroner stated that it appeared Beth Doe had likely been sexually assaulted, but probably after her death, so post-mortem. So she was killed and then assaulted. Like I said, her nose, ears and breast had been cut off, and they were not found with her body or at the scene. So her killer had either disposed of them elsewhere or perhaps kept them as a trophy, but they have never been found. And it's believed that she had only been dead for somewhere between 7 to 24 hours before she was found. Her body had been dismembered with a, quote, fine serrated tool, and the killer actually did a pretty good job at it. They clearly had some knowledge of the anatomy, however it's not believed her killer was in the medical profession. They weren't like a surgeon or anything. They didn't do that good a job at dismembering the body, so perhaps they were a butcher or something like that. Some of her body parts had been wrapped in newspaper, and this newspaper was the New York Sunday newspaper, and it was dated the 26th of September 1976, so it was about 3 months old. Whereas other remains had been wrapped in a cut up blanket or bedspread that was an orangey colour when it was found, but it's believed originally when it was first brought it was probably like a pinky colour. The colour had faded over time, and it had an embroidered floral pattern on it. I believe Beth Doe was found naked. I couldn't find any information online about whether she was wearing any clothes or whether there are any clothes in the suitcases with her, so I'm guessing there wasn't, which does make sense because she was sexually assaulted. There was also some straw and dry packing foam in the suitcases, and the suitcases seem to have been spray painted black for some reason, and the handles had been cut off. But before they were spray painted black, it was determined that 2 of them were blue in colour with blue, red and white stripes, and the third was a tan colour with a blue plaid design. Many composite sketches and reconstructions of Jane Doe were created over the years, some as recently as 2015, all of which I will be showing you now. Just bear in mind, scientists have obviously kind of had to guess what her nose looked like because the killer had removed it. The images also show Jane Doe with long hair as well as short, because when she was found she had shorter hair. It was around a shoulder length, but it was theorized that maybe her killer had cut it short to make her look different. So some of her pictures show her with shorter shoulder length hair, which is how her hair was when her body was found, and some pictures show her with longer hair. But here's what we do know for certain about Beth Jane Doe and her appearance. She was a white woman believed to be between the ages of 15 and 25. Her height was estimated to have been between 4'11" and 5'4", and her weight was approximately 140 to 150 pounds, which is how much she weighed when pregnant. Jane Doe had dark brown hair, which was her natural hair colour. She had brown eyes, and the medical examiner stated that her blood was type O. She had 2 moles, one of them was on her left cheek and the other was above her eye, and she also had a 5.5-inch scar on her left leg and a 2-inch scar on her calf. And interestingly, on her left hand, on her palm, someone had written in ink the letters WSR followed by 2 numbers, which were either a 4 or a 5 and then a 4 or a 7. They couldn't tell exactly what the numbers were because it was a little bit smudged, and authorities couldn't work out what these letters and numbers on her hand meant. They didn't know if Doe had written them on her hand herself or if someone else had written it on her. If Doe had written them on her hand herself, then that means that she was most likely right-handed because it was on her left hand. And I actually read an interesting theory online that maybe these letters were the initials of her killer and the numbers were the killer's age or something. Maybe she knew she was in a dangerous situation. Maybe she knew she was about to be killed, and so in an attempt to help detectives identify her murderer, she wrote their initials on her hand. Or maybe WSR was her own initials. There is also another interesting theory about what these letters could have meant, but I'll talk more about that theory a little bit later on. Anyway, these letter and number combos were compared to license plates, but nothing came up. Unfortunately, like I said, authorities haven't been able to work out what these letters and numbers symbolize. All they could work out about these letters and numbers was that they were written on her hand between 8 to 12 hours before her body was found. After an examination of Doe's teeth, it was clear that they were in pretty bad condition at the time of her death. A lot of her teeth were decaying, and it was clear that she had suffered with a dental disease, probably when she was younger, so it had gotten better by the time she had passed away. She had had a couple of teeth taken out, and she had also had some fillings, but these were done when she was younger, probably when she was a child. It was obvious that she hadn't received dental care in a while because of the state of her teeth, because of how much her teeth were decaying. And this is surprising considering it was found that she had a fracture to her upper right incisors, and this would have caused her so much pain. And I believe she had been suffering with this fracture since before her death, so I don't think it was an injury that she sustained during her murder. She had had this fracture for at least a little while, and like I said, it would have been causing her so much pain. Once her teeth were examined, they were noted on a dental chart, and authorities looked into numerous missing persons cases in the US and Canada to see if they could link any of them to the Carbon County Beth Jane Doe, but they couldn't identify any of them as being her. Her fingerprints were also taken, and these prints were passed on to the FBI. They submitted them into national databases, but there were no matches. And no one ever really came forward to identify her either. The sketches and reconstructions of her face were all released to the public, but no one seemed to know who this woman was, or they were keeping very tight-lipped if they did. Because of this, Beth Jane Doe was buried in 1983, about 7 years after she was discovered, and she went to her grave still without her name, with her baby buried with her. And this case just went cold for years. From what I can gather, authorities didn't really receive any tips or leads from the public. It seemed like Jane Doe and her killer were just always going to remain unidentified. In the year 2007, so 24 years after her body was buried, it was exhumed for testing. Her tooth enamel, hair and bone samples were sent off for isotope analysis, and the results of these tests indicated that Jane Doe was actually born in Central or Western Europe and had probably emigrated to America when she was a child or in her early teenage years, between 5 to 10 years before she was murdered. It's possible that she was of Mediterranean heritage, and the test suggested that she had spent some time in the southeast area of the US, possibly in Tennessee. And according to one source, these tests also suggested that she hadn't actually spent much time in Pennsylvania, which, if you remember, was where her body was discovered. So it seems as though she lived elsewhere and was probably murdered elsewhere, and then her killer travelled with her body to Pennsylvania to dump it, which does make sense since no one appeared to recognise her in Pennsylvania. Scientists were able to collect a DNA profile of Jane Doe, however, no match has been found in the international database. Investigators continue to look into missing persons reports, and so far around 12 women have been ruled out of this inquiry. None of them are Jane Doe, and I'll put the names of these women that have been excluded on screen now. However, in September of 2019, so just last year, the Pennsylvania State Police announced to the public that they were looking into the possibility that Beth Jane Doe could be a girl named Madeline Cruz, or Maggie Cruz as she was also called. The police received a tip from someone who went to school with Maggie, and they said that she actually looked pretty similar to the reconstruction images of Jane Doe, and she was missing. Maggie's peer said that she lived in Massachusetts for a while with a foster family, but that she ran away in 1974 to a place called Tarrytown in New York. Sources say that her foster sister ran away with her, but that she returned to Massachusetts about a week later, although Maggie Cruz never did. She never returned, and no one heard from her until 1976, the same year that Beth Jane Doe's body was found. In the summer of 1976, Maggie Cruz reportedly contacted one of her old friends and asked if she could borrow some money because she was pregnant, just like Beth Jane Doe. But after this, no one heard from Maggie again. No one had any idea what happened to her. So detectives began investigating this potential lead, this potential link between Maggie Cruz and Beth Jane Doe. However, it didn't take them long to track down Maggie. She was in fact alive and safe and well. I don't know the circumstances surrounding why she decided to disappear or where the police found her. Sources just say that she was found alive and well, so she is obviously not this Jane Doe victim. And sadly, that is pretty much it for this case. I don't really have any more information to share with you. I'm hopeful that Beth Jane Doe will be identified soon. They do have her DNA profile, so it's just finding a match. And hopefully, if and when they do find a match, when they find out her identity, from there they can try and identify who did this to her, who killed her and why. There were a couple of theories that I came across online regarding who might have murdered this poor woman. For instance, some believe that maybe she was the victim of an honor killing. Perhaps her family are the ones who killed her. Maybe they found out that she was pregnant and that brought shame to the family because she was young, possibly just a teenager, and so that's why no family ever reported her missing, because the family were the ones that did this to her. Another popular theory is that maybe she was in an abusive relationship and she was killed by a partner, and something that may back up this theory is the writing on the palm of her hand. If you remember from earlier, the letters WSR were written in ink on her left hand, and it was theorized that maybe this stood for Women's Services and Resources, which I believe was a place where victims of abuse could go if they needed help and support. And apparently there was a Women's Resources and Services Centre not too far from where Jane Doe's body was found, and it had opened just a year before in 1975. Maybe she was in a dangerous situation, maybe she was being abused by a partner and she knew she wasn't safe, and so she planned on going to this centre, which is why she wrote WSR on her hand. As I mentioned earlier, authorities were never able to confirm what these letters on her hand meant or stood for, but I think this theory is definitely very possible. Perhaps she was killed by the father of her baby. Maybe he found out that she was pregnant and he didn't want to have a child with her. Maybe he was having an affair with Beth Doe and he didn't want to risk his wife or partner finding out that he had gotten another woman pregnant, and so he decided to kill them both so that she wouldn't. Another theory that I didn't actually see mentioned online but that I thought of whilst researching this case is that maybe Jane Doe was murdered by someone who wanted her baby. As we know, she was 9 months pregnant at the time of her death, and the fully grown fetus was in the suitcase with her remains. Maybe someone intended to steal her baby, but the plan failed, the baby died. It literally sounds insane, but I've actually covered a case similar to this theory before, the case of Bobby Jo Stinnett. I'll leave that video linked down below if anyone wants to go and watch it. She was a young mother who was murdered by a woman named Lisa Montgomery, and Lisa was desperate for a child. So she murdered Bobby Jo and cut her baby out of her stomach, thankfully the baby survived and she just pretended that the baby was her own. But Lisa was eventually caught, I believe just a couple of days after the murder. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these theories in the comments. Do you think any of them are what actually happened, or do you have any theories about this case? Let me know down below. I think the theory that I believe the most is that she was killed by the father of her baby. Someone did not want her to have this baby, and I think that maybe she was having an affair with maybe a married man, and this married man couldn't risk his wife finding out, so he killed her. Like I said, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And yeah, that is it for this case. As of today, Beth Jane Doe remains unidentified. As with all my Doe cases and unsolved cases, I will leave some contact details in the description box if anyone watching has any information about this case. Before I go, I just want to give a special shout out to the members of my Patreon page. Thank you so much for your support, guys. If anyone else wants to become a member of our little Patreon family, then the link is always in the description box of my videos. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Molly. Bye guys.